Hey everyone, Selwyn here from Wynn Strength. We're just getting through some warm-up sets of the safety squat yoke barbell. Check out a video here I did about these squats. But today's video we're going to talk about when you should use a lifting belt. Now I think the data is pretty clear, both empirical and anecdotal, that lifting belts help you lift more weight. I don't think that's up for debate. It should be pretty clear that there are no record holders breaking world records without using lifting belt of some sort. Second argument would be they make you have, or they cause you to have a weaker core. There we have some scientific proof that shows that the lifting belts actually recruit more core musculature when used appropriately. And that's because the core acts as a little brace around your waist, allowing you to squeeze harder against an external force. So now that that's out of the way, even though they are beneficial, I don't think they should be used all the time. So from the bigger picture, I really only like to use them for maybe 4 to 5 lifts, and they circle around the main lifts. Coming from like a powerlifting background, I obviously like to use the belt for the squat, whether that be regular barbell squat or an SS yoke squat, deadlift, whether that be sumo or conventional, and the overhead press, and finally a barbell row, and that's just for the heavy variants of those versions. Now when I'm doing my accessory list, so any of those movements, front squat, pause squats, tempo squats, deficit deadlifts, pin presses, things like that, I won't use the squat belt or the lifting belt, and that's mainly because it acts as a self-regulating way to train. Because the belt allows you to lift slightly heavier weights than you can without the belt, I want my core to be the rate limiting factor when I'm doing my accessory movements. And that's also because no one really cares about how much you can tempo squat. They're more really concerned about how much you can squat regularly. So with that in mind, with that kind of framework in mind, I don't like to use it for any accessory movements whatsoever. Again, for a stress limiting factor, and then to just be able to train a movement without having to worry and be reliant on a belt. Now, when in those movements do I start to introduce the lifting belt? I like to introduce the lifting belt at around RPE 6 if you use RPE training, but if you're not using any sort of RPE, I like to introduce the lifting belt at the very latest for that last warm-up set, or the second to last warm-up set, and every set moving forward. That way you're able to get good sub-maximal loads without any lifting belt, so you're getting some core activation, some training without the belt. And then when the weights start to get heavy, we're going to introduce that lifting belt in order to allow us to lift more weights for longer. And also the reason we introduce it in the last warm-up set or the last 2 warm-up sets is that we still want to train that motor pattern, because we all know that using a belt and not using a belt, the squat is still a squat, but it varies how you move the body ever so slightly. And when we start to get those heavy movements, we don't want to introduce a belt when the weight's already at near maximal loads. We want to introduce it a little bit before that, so at least we have 1 to 2 sets of practice before we get into that heavy set. Kind of like we don't jump up to our 1 rep max immediately. We want to ramp up to that with the warm-ups. We want to ramp up the belt usage in those warm-ups, even though we don't want to use it for the entire warm-up set. So hopefully that helps you with your training. When to use a belt appropriately. I don't think you should ever be scared of using a lifting belt. Don't listen to people that tell you not to use one unless you're competing in a sport where you're not allowed to use a lifting belt. I don't know what sport that would be, but if you do, then don't use it. But just about any other time you're training in gym, use this belt when appropriate. Use it for your big, heavy compound movements. There's no need to use them for lateral raises. So this has been Selwyn from Wynn Strength, and remember, a better life through strength.